Alright, this is Video03. We're looking at fleshing out more of our room, maybe adding some objects finally to our game. We've added some, but adding a few more. I did want to mention before we continue just some additional sprites you might want to create if you haven't already. So far we're just using the platform and the wall, but there's a couple other sprites that we're going to use for room construction that might come in handy. First one here is sprite ledge. So I'm going to open that up. See if we can open it. Not opening. There it is. And all it really is just a line. You can choose whatever color you like, but if you go into the editor and just put a line right across the top, use the line tool and just draw, maybe choose this color there and just draw right across the top. And again, this is just going to be a line that you can jump through from the bottom but not from the top, so be able to stand on it but jump through it from the bottom, and this is what it'll look like when we don't have any of the tiles on. Just make that a line right there at the top. So that's our ledge. Close that out. And then for the ramp, just a big black box. So just go into edit. It's a 16 by 16 box, and or this is the ramp. Just fill it with black. Set the origin up to the top left corner. And then for the slope, fill it with gray, kind of a light gray. And again, set the origin up to the top left corner. Later on we'll go on and create those objects once we need them, but I just wanted to complete our platforms. That's what we need sprite-wise for our platforms, at least right now. I'd like to actually create those objects so that we can create our inheritance hierarchy for our game when it comes to platforms. At the top is going to be object solid. That's going to be the parent object of all the other platform or wall type objects. Next, underneath that, we'll have the platform as the direct child of object solid, and then we'll have wall the same way, is a direct child of object solid. Now we're going to create an object called ledge. Let's do that now. Object ledge. And the sprite we're going to use is our ledge sprite. So we'll bring that up. Hello, machine. So there's our ledge. And then we want to make its parent actually object platform. So this will be a grandchild class of object solid. Okay, so let's set the parent then to object platform. The next object we'll need to create, I'm going to save my game here just in case bad things happen. We're also going to create object ramp. I'm just going to duplicate object ledge because it has the same parent. And I'm going to change the name to object ramp. And we'll change the sprite to our ramp sprite. It's there. Parent is still object platform. And then finally, our last object will be object slope. We'll make this sprite our slope sprite. We'll only see that when we're building the room. And we'll set the parent here to object ramp. So we have 4 levels of inheritance in this game. So there's object ramp. And then I think we've got all of our platform type objects. Now later on we're going to have to provide lots of different kinds of slopes and ramps later on, because there's all little pieces of ramps that you'll have to make. But for the main objects types, these are the ones that we're going to look at. All right, now we're going to take a look at setting up the alien. This is Zool himself, and Zool's going to have multiple objects, and we're going to use inheritance and parent objects to simplify the way we're going to code our game. If we look at just these four states of object Zool, or these are different states that object Zool can be in. One, he's just standing on land of some sort. Here he's getting across ice. Here he's in the air, and here he's clinging to a wall or doing something with the wall. This kind of diagram is called a finite state machine, and it shows you the transitions between one object state to another. So for example, if you're on land and you hit the jump button, it's going to, the transition says, okay, you're on land, and if you jump, you're going to go into the air. And now if you move left or right, you'll still be in the air. But say you hit a wall, you collide with a wall, then you're going to transition to the wall state. And then if you get to a platform, say you climb up the wall and jump onto a platform, then you go back to the land state. So this shows you all the different state transitions and actions that will cause you to go from one state to the other. And this would be a good diagram to reference when you're doing different parts of the game. It's included in the book. And so we're going to be trying to implement this finite state machine in our code. Complicated, yes, but I think we can do it. Now, to keep track of all of our Zool states, we're going to have to create a series of constants to differentiate between the states. What's unfortunate, or maybe fortunate, is that in the new version of GameMaker, there are no constants. They got rid of those. And they replaced them with something called a macro. Macros are things you might see in C language. They're more common there. And basically it's just you provide a string and it replaces it with another set of text. And it behaves like a constant, so that's what they're doing here. And it gives you a little bit more functionality other than that. But so what they recommend, from what I'm reading, is that they want you to create a script that defines all your constants for the whole game. So we're going to do that here. We're going to say create script. In this script, we'll give it a name like define constants, something like that. Define constants. Okay, and in our script, we'll add some code. Looks like we're in drag and drop mode here. So maybe execute code. Let's see if they call it that. Execute code, yeah, so we'll do that. And what do we want to do here? Well, the syntax for creating constants they're actually called macros. So we use the term macro like that. And then you put the name of the macro. And so for our first macro, typically with constants, you make them all capital letters. And that's true in C and lots of other languages. And so it's just a style guideline. You don't have to, but it's recommended. And then you put the value. Notice that there's no equal sign, so that might be a little bit troubling. And then the other thing that's weird is there's no semicolon either, because these aren't statements. These are just string replacements. So every time it sees Z state stand, ooh, that should say Z state stand, not Z stand. All of them are going to start with the prefix of Z state. And so the standing state is going to have a value of 0. So every time it sees that Z state stand, it's going to replace that text with a 0, and then it behaves like a constant because it'll become basically a literal number, or a number literal would be another way to say it. So you say Z state, and then walk, and we're going to give that a value of 1. So each one of these constants will have a unique value. They don't necessarily have to be sequential, but it makes sense if it did. Our next state is jump. So these are all the different states that Zool can go through. Next macro is the state fall. We'll give that a value of 3. And then the next one is climb. Give that a value of 4. After climb, we have cling. It's clinging to the wall instead of climbing the wall. It's just not moving. And then slipping. I think this is on ice. And then finally, the last state is skidding. One state I'm not seeing is dying. That must be a different object altogether. But what we'll do is we'll call this function, this script, when probably just once right at the beginning of the game, in some kind of initialization object, probably in a controller somewhere. But at least we have these there to access when we need them. Okay, so I'm going to close this window. We have our script now in our menu. And now we have our set of constants / macros. Forgot to mention a couple other constants we're going to need. And we've seen this in other games, but we have a macro. I'll maybe put a space there and say macro. And for this one, we're going to say face right. And we'll give that a value of 1. And then face left. And we'll give that a value of -1. And then I think that's all the constants we need, at least right now. So now I'll save that. Now we're going to create the parent class for all the Zool objects. This will be object Zool. So let's create that now. So I go to objects now and say create object. We'll call this object Zool. And for our sprite, we'll use our object Zool stand right, or sprite Zool stand right if we have that one. Here's our Zools, and stand right is sliding, skidding. There's stand right. Okay, so that'll be our default Zool sprite. That's all we need there. And then we're going to create 4 more objects. These are the ones that we have on our diagram, our state diagram. So I'm just going to duplicate Zool here. Before we get too far into it, let's make our folders. So I'm going to say add group, and we'll call this group platforms, just like we have with the sprites. Platforms. Now grab all the platforms and drag them into the platforms folder, and then I'm also going to make another folder or another group. We'll call these Zools. These are all the Zools, and we'll drag our first Zool into that. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate now Zool because it's similar, and then this will be object Zool It's our first one we want. Object Zool land. And we'll set the parent to Object Zool. And then we'll also duplicate that. This will be Object Zool air. This is the one, Zool's one, he's flying through the air. And we'll change the sprite to the air sprite. We're going to assume right on all of these. So I think that's fall. We want slip, jump, maybe do jump. Okay, so I would use jump, and then we'll duplicate that. Next state would be a wall. So we'll say Object Zool wall. Change our sprite to maybe the cling sprite. Climb sprite, there it is, climb. And then finally oh, I didn't duplicate it. Let me try that again. We'll call this Object Zool ice, when he's on the ice. And we'll use the I think this one, slip. We'll do slip right. All of them have a parent class of Object Zool. And then we want to place an Object Zool just above the ground, kind of like if you've done fish pod, we did the same thing. So we'll go to our room. Now that we have the object, we can include it in the game. So we grab our Zool, and we'll put him a little bit above the platform. And then we have a character in the game. That's really cool. Now I won't be able to do anything if we actually run the game. Let's see what happens when we run it. I think it just sits there because we haven't given it any behavior yet. But at least we have an object in the room. And we'll see what it looks like. And here's our game. Like I said, not much going on yet. Zool's just hanging in the air. Half our room's missing, but it does look nice. Eventually we're going to have to use viewports to limit the scope of what we can see. Right now, looking pretty good. Notice that we can see our platform kind of sticking out over here. We'll have to fix that. I think the platform needs to be invisible, but we haven't changed that yet. Alright, now let's look at Object Zool, and we're going to add some behavior to it. First we're going to add a create event. Alright, so the create event, you just say add event. Let me say create. Double click on the top of the window, brings it up. We have drag and drop stuff there. Now in this create event we want to do a set variable action. So here's a assigned variable, and the variable we're going to change is facing. So this will be an object level variable, and we want to initialize it to face left. So the default direction when Zool gets created is face left. You don't ever want to click relative on variables that you're creating for the first time, because then it'll try to add it to that variable and it doesn't exist, and it will crash the program instantly. So just make sure you don't click on the relative tab. And next now that we have them facing the right direction, then what we want to do is to change object. And that's instance change. We can execute a script so we can avoid some of this drag and drop stuff. So I'll just do a execute code section, and we'll just do some GML coding. Maximize the screen and make it so we can see the side of it. This is odd. Yeah, my screen's a little cramped, so I wonder if I can. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the code we want to create is we want to do an instance change. Instance change. What do we want to change to? Object Zool. And since we're always going to put Zool kind of in the air, well, what do we want to do? Now, I think we want to do land, and we'll let Zool see that it's not on the ground, and then it'll change itself in the air. And then we do want to do perform events. That'll call the create event. Also, a lot of people think perform events is just for the create event, but it also will do the destroy event of the instance you're changing from, which is object Zool, and evidently we're going to have a destroy event associated with it at some point. So make sure you say true there. And then what we want to do is we're going to add another event. So going back, I don't know how to do that. We're done with the create event. Go back here, add another event, and this is the let's see, we're going to add the other outside room event. Here's other outside room. So when we go outside the room, what do we want it to do? Well, we want to do a screen wrap. So let's see if we can find that. I say wrap around the room. Now, in older versions of GameMaker, this never did really work very well. Since we're not going to be jumping off the top or the bottom and doing like an asteroids game, we're just going to be wrapping around the edges or the horizontal or the sides of the room. So we're just going to turn off vertical. It asks for a margin, and I think this is how far outside the room Zool has to go before it actually does the wrapping. There's been some problems in the past when you're going from one side of the room to the other, kind of teleporting, that you fall through the floor and then you can't figure out why. That's had that problem in previous versions of GameMaker. And so we're going to set a margin here a little bit bigger. Now our grid size is 16 by 16, so I'm going to say 32. That might be too big, but we'll try that for now. And that's our margin. So anytime that Zool goes outside the room, we're going to wrap around to the other side. And we don't have to code that. We'll see if this works. If it doesn't, we'll just code our own. Next, we need to add a draw event. So go back here, I'll close this. Adding a draw event. Draw. Now, you have to remember that if you're going to be drawing any sprites, as soon as you say, I'm going to use the draw event, basically you're telling GameMaker, okay, I'm going to have you do the drawing anymore. I want me to do the drawing, and I'm going to have to do all the drawing. I mean, I have to draw the character even. Why are we doing the draw event? It's because they're basically we're trying to disable it, because we don't ever want Zool to draw, basically, but we want Zool to be there. And then I think I think what we're doing is we're saying we want Zool to be in charge of all the drawing. So the parent class is going to be in charge of all the drawing. So we're going to have a huge if statement here. We're probably want to do this in GML. We could do it with drag and drop, but it gets really ugly. So so the first thing we do is we're going to test our variable to see if we're facing to the right. So let's do a variable test. That's if expression, this one here, if variable. Well, we said we were going to use GML, so let's just use execute code again. Puzzled why it does that. Trying to scooch it over to the right, but it keeps doing that. Can't see it. So I'm still getting used to this IDE. It's quite troublesome at times. Finally I can code. First thing we want to do is we want to check to see what our facing variable is looking like. Now when you're doing a comparison, you have to use, I think, the equal operator. That means that's the equality operator, trying to see if facing is equal to face right. That's our macro. If that's the case, then what do we want to do? Well, we got to test what state we're in. And so we create a start block, and we're going to test a variable called state. Now, this state variable hasn't been created yet. My guess is that it should have been created in the create event of Object Zool, so we're going to have to go back and do that. But we can say if state, I guess it's going to make it a variable. If the state is equal to zStateStand, that means we're in the standing state, then we want to draw the standing sprite. And so and typically in GML they have these, what I'm looking for is sprite draw, but I don't see that in the GML. So here's draw sprite. So boy, there's lots of different versions of it. Wow. They beefed up draw sprite quite a bit. I think we'll just use this basic one. It's hard to read. It says subimage. So first, which sprite do we want to draw? Well, we're in the standing state, so we'll do SPR Zool stand right, because we're facing to the right. Our subimage, this one doesn't animate, so we'll just say 0. And then our last parameter is x and y. We'll just say x and y. Wherever this object is, that's where we want to draw this sprite, I guess. So we just use the current values of x and y. Won't change them. So now we've drawn our sprite. Hopefully that's the right syntax. We're getting an error here, though. Why is it saying that? Yeah, it says unassigned variable state reference. So because we haven't created state yet, or we haven't created that state variable yet. And then we're going to have a whole series of these. If we're in the walking state, we're going to do another if statement. Now, is this tremendously efficient? Not really. This is going to happen a lot, so it's going to be calling this draw event every frame, obviously. So the question is, how do we want to code this? I think we want to say else if here, because we want to minimize the amount of processing. In the old version, they did it kind of in an inefficient way, so I'm going to try to spice it up here. So else if and here we'll say state equal the state walk. There's our walking macro. So if the current Zool state is that, then we'll use the walking sprite. So instead of standing right, we're going to walk to the right. Now remember, this is an animated sprite, so you have to be careful here. If we set the sub-image to 0, it's always going to show the first frame of the animation. It'll never get to the end of the other, so it'll look like he's kind of sliding left and right. That's not what we want. Now, if GameRaker still does it the same way, if you want it to continue to animate without resetting the sub-image, you put a -1 in there for the sub-image index. So we'll see if that's still the case. It might just bomb, but we'll find out. And then here we'll stop right here. So we've got this draw method set up, and then what we want to do is, if we're not facing to the right, we're facing to the left, so we're going to add another part here for that. We'll say else, and in here we're just going to copy all this stuff, but we're just going to change all the right stuff to left. Now eventually, as we go get all the other states going, it's going to get even more busy. See state stand. If we're in the standing state and we're facing to the left, then we're going to use the left sprite instead of the right. And then if we're walking, we're not walking to the right, we're walking to the left, but everything else holds true. So we'll say left here. And then we'll put a closing bracket here just so that they balance. And then it looks like the logic here should work out using GML. It's a lot more concise than it would have been had we used the drag and drop way of programming. This is a lot more contained, given that my screen resolution is terrible. This is probably a better way to illustrate that. So now we have the draw method taken care of. I can close that. We do have to go back to the create event and create our state variable. So let's do that. We'll go here to execute code. What do we want to do? Before we do an instance change, anytime you do an instance change, the code's going to stop right there. So anything, if you want to do anything, you have to do it before you do the instance change. So here we're going to create our state variable, and we'll set it to, I don't know, initialize it to something. Z state stand, because that's the default sprite. So maybe we do that. Okay, so now that variable exists. Let's see if our problems went away over here. When we look at the draw state, it said state wasn't defined, and see now all those warnings are now gone because we've created that variable. All right. So I'm going to stop there because this video is kind of long enough, and then we'll pick this up next in the next video. Next, we'll be creating the land object, and this is the one that will just stand on the platform once it gets to the platform. So I'll stop in here.